drive, way back, it might be, it could be, it is. Holy cow! Welcome to another broadcast of Bricks Behind the Ivy.
Hey, Cub fans, welcome to another episode of Bricks Behind the Ivy. Thank you so much to our awesome sponsors, Wrigleyville Sports, the best sports store in Wrigleyville, and Yagi Road Roasting Company, based in Valparaiso, Indiana, serving cups of coffee just as special as the moments you drink them in.
Hello, welcome to Bricks Behind the Ivy.
Hey, Cub fans, welcome to another episode of Bricks Behind the Ivy. I am always your hostess, the mostest, Jeff Candid Cubs Rogowskis, and this is a really special episode of Bricks Behind the Ivy. I am joined by most of Tread Athletics today and new special assistant for the Chicago Cubs, Tyler Zombro and Ben Brewster. Guys, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having us. Definitely plenty more to tread than just us, but we're happy to happy to be here. There's another 75 people that we could pull in here, but really excited to be here, and obviously excited for Tyler here to be able to take kind of a next step in his own career and join the Cubs. So I know that's been a special thing for him. Yeah, and you've got the face of Tread Athletics with Ben, so that's a rarity. Not many people get to talk to the man behind the scenes that you see his face often. So excited to be on.
Yeah, no, this is such a cool opportunity. And as someone who really likes to kind of get into the nitty gritty, nerdy side of baseball, this is like baseball church for folks who are going to be listening to this episode. So thank you so much for your time. A Bricks Behind the Ivy tradition for first-time guests is I'm always interested. You know, the Cubs were born via the WGN era and family traditions. That's how a lot of people end up finding the Cubs. A lot of people end up finding baseball. So I like to try to get an idea of all the guests and, you know, where they found baseball and what their, you know, baseball origin story is. So Ben, we'll start with you, and then Tyler as well. Where'd you guys find baseball? How'd you get into this sport?
I think probably similar for me to most other kids out there. I mean, I'm from Baltimore originally, so grew up going to Camden Yards. You know, you just fall in love with the game. You wonder what it would be like to play there in front of 50,000 people one day. You just kind of picture yourself in those shoes. Those guys are superheroes. You're just like, you know, you fall in love with the sport at a young age. I think a lot of kids have that kind of naive dream, and then, you know, for whatever reason, just kind of get pulled away from it for a lot of them. Others keep playing through high school. Some get lucky enough to play in college. Others, you know, are able to pursue it at the professional level. So I always kind of grew up with that love of baseball, and somewhere around freshman year of high school, I went from just kind of playing it more casually, you know, Little League, you know, playing on local travel teams here and there, to really deciding I wanted to, you know, pursue it at the highest level I could. And I wasn't that good, to be honest, at the time. I was good for my like little travel teams growing up, but suddenly I'm a freshman. I'm playing against seniors, and, you know, I'm one of the worst players on the team. I don't make, you know, I'm not the varsity starter or anything. So I think for me, that was like a specific moment I can remember where I'm like, I really want to do something with my life, and it's going to be baseball, and I'm going to do everything I can to figure out like how to play at the highest level. So I was a guy throwing 70 miles an hour, 70 to 73, 6'3", 150-pound string bean, like didn't know anything about anything, couldn't afford a pitching coach. Like I was just a kid who loved baseball, was trying to figure it out. And so, yeah, I spent the next, you know, decade plus of my life, 15 years of my life trying to figure it out. Was able to walk on and play at the University of Maryland, where I was once again probably the worst player on the team, but just good enough to make the team as a walk-on. 4 years later, I was just good enough to get drafted. Played for the Chicago White Sox organization for a few years, ran into a bunch of injuries, and just through that whole learning process, tried to take more of like an academic approach to the problem. How can I view this from an analytics lens, from a physics lens? How can I really deconstruct it to figure out how those guys that are, you know, on TV throwing 100 miles an hour, how do they do it? It's got to be possible. Like, why can't I figure that out myself? And so that's kind of the approach I took. And I didn't know anything when I started, and I still arguably don't know anything now, but I know a lot more than when I started. So, just continually trying to learn. And for me, all those failures, you know, I didn't ever make it to the big leagues. I've had 3 hip surgeries. I've had 2 elbow surgeries. You know, I've thrown 70 miles an hour. I've thrown 98 miles an hour as a sidearm lefty. I've weighed 150 pounds at 6'3", and I've weighed 220 pounds at 6'3". So I've figured out quite a bit as far as how to apply this stuff to my own career. But then there was that kind of moment when Tread specifically was founded, which is right around when I got drafted in 2014, realizing like I've learned enough stuff here. I think I could help some other players and apply some of the nutritional principles, the throwing mechanics principles, the pitch design principles, like all these things that I've learned that have helped me. Again, not a finished product. We're always learning, but I just saw how far that had taken me, and I saw all these guys who had all this, natural quote unquote talent, but didn't eat right, didn't know any of the mobility stuff, had tons of mechanical issues, and it's like, man, you have such a better starting point than I had. Like, you realize you could take this game so far. And when I got to the minor leagues, it was like player after player. It's like a Latin player, 19 years old, 150 pounds, throwing 94, and I'm like, dude, you could throw 101 miles an hour. You don't even realize it. So, yeah, just trying to begin to apply those principles and help other players, get to the highest level. And that's kind of my story in a nutshell.
Tyler, how about you?
Yeah, I think baseball is always a big part of my family. So a lot of playing history behind it. Grandfather played professionally for the Philadelphia Athletics. Dad played at a high level. Other grandfather as well. So I was always around the game. One of my dad's best friends is PJ Forbes, who managed for forever in the Pirates org, the Dodgers org. So like every summer, or even when I was a kid, like I was going to a big league stadium with some player that I knew.
Wow.
So I was very early embedded into the game. I actually joke with a lot of people. Reggie Jefferson's a close family friend. There's a picture of me as a child, and it's Reggie Jefferson when he was in Seattle, Ken Griffey and Randy Johnson, and Ken Griffey's home as a baby. And I'm like, it's only downhill from here for me. Like, pinnacle, and they were like, yeah, I lost my mojo then. Yeah, and then, I mean, look, I wasn't the most gifted physical athlete in the world. So I think that's the really interesting thing about Ben and I is we both come from that lens of probably weren't the most talented individuals, but maximized what we had and figured out ways to do it. For me, a lot of that was through data initiatives, pitch design, usage trends, creating angles, whatever that might be. Ben alluded to a lot of the raw anatomy and physiology behind mechanics. And like, ultimately, that's how he and I kind of like meshed and met in a lot of ways is like I was coming from data, biomech, anatomy, physiology. Ben was coming from anatomy, physiology, biomech to data. So it's really cool because those are like the pronged elements of development of Tread. And so, again, my career path didn't make it past AAA, but certainly enjoyed leveraging what I could from a data perspective to maximize what I had. And so I think that's ultimately kind of like what shaped Tread is us figuring out how to maximize and win on the margins, and how do we take this information that we know and relay it to athletes. And Ben is a kinesiology background, like I'm a pre-med background, so having understanding of the human body and tying all this together for athletes, while we both pursued it to a high degree, I think it created the ambition and the passion of us to help other people.
Yeah, I've always found it interesting, just thinking of with baseball players and looking at front offices and, development departments, analytics departments, and the different types of people. I've always had this like dark horse theory of like players that really wanted to be good that didn't have the same physical gifts are the ones that usually end up being the great coaches, because they have an understanding of what needed to be done but didn't have the ability, and they get to meet people who have the ability and help them with that other part. So it's really interesting, kind of like my assumption bias of that being a really good like synergy of that process, and being able to apply like what you've learned to help other players reach another level. So Tread itself like has a really great reputation. You guys have worked with guys like Mitch Keller, who's been, taking another step out in Pittsburgh, Cole Reagans, who's been just absolutely phenomenal out in Kansas City. Is there like a vision, an end game of individuals you want to work with? Is there like a status quo, or, how do you sell Tread to players?
I wouldn't directly say that we actively go and sell Tread. I think that the idea is like the players that find us and are really motivated and seeking that value We just do everything we can to maximize the value in their career and how we help them develop. And then that word spreads pretty organically. So we put out 90+% of our information for free online. We put out more YouTube videos and posts and everything than virtually anybody. So we're putting out a ton of information for free. We're doing everything we can to help these players. A lot of that will spread organically, word of mouth. Doesn't take a whole lot of actively going out and trying to sell people. At this point, we've worked with hundreds of major league guys. It's not like, oh my God, if we can only work with this guy or this guy. To me, it's more about like a player who's really driven and accountable and wants to be there and wants to improve. And that, like, I would rather work with a single A guy who's really invested in the process than a big league guy who, isn't responsive, doesn't particularly take it as seriously. So that's like a coach's dream player, is somebody who just really wants to invest in the process. They're, coachable, but I don't really like the term coachable, because I do think athletes should have a healthy skepticism. I think they should challenge ideas. I think there should be a back and forth dialogue and a collaborative process between the coach and the player, versus like, hey, you just need to be coachable and follow what I say. That's really not the approach we take. It's way more educating the players, encouraging them to question, and then being able to have those back and forths and those dialogues. So I don't know if Tyler has a better answer than that. It's not, I wouldn't give you a list of people that like I would love to work with, but if they reached out, they wanted to be part of what we're doing, we would absolutely give them our best effort.
Yeah, I would say it's been really interesting to see our growth at Tread over the years. When I first moved down in 2020, we had, 200 athletes, call it ish. And we're now over 2,000. And
Oh, wow.
But the way that I see this is like, it's not through a one size fits all. It's not targeting like one demographic. It's just like it's become a culmination of players who realize that we've helped with XYZ case studies. And then it's like, okay, who wants to follow through and do the work as well? And I think relying on that word of mouth, it's not, we're not selling a product, right? It's a service. It's a 365-day service where you're in constant communication with your coach. And like, I probably know way too many things that I don't even need to know about my athletes, but it's just part of it, right? But I think to Ben's point, we just sought to enact this plan of what I've already mentioned of data, biomech, anatomy, physiology. You can imagine what ties in there with injury history, S&C principles, mobility principles, throwing history, mechanical cueing, drills they've done, right? Like, it's all this stuff. And then you lay out that plan. And ultimately, it doesn't matter if the kid is 12 years old or 35 years old. You just want somebody who's going to follow the plan and kind of know your vision for where you're going. And what's so rewarding from the Tread lens is like getting the 14-year-old to make his high school team is just as enjoyable as Tanner Scott going from a zero WAR player to $72 million player, right? Like those wins are all the same to us, because success in your development is success in your development. And it really doesn't matter what demographic that is. I think we got really, really good with the pro population there for a bit, which really took us off. You can see the trend there a lot in like 21, 22. But that goes for every demographic. Like Cole Reagan's is a lot of compensations off of 2 TJs. Well, now we can use that to help the random 17-year-old who just unfortunately had a TJ, and now we can help that with him and his rehab. So it's a culmination of all those stories, and thankfully it goes across all age groups.
No,
Yeah,
I think sorry, go ahead.
I was going to add to that. I view a lot of what we're doing as just trying to connect the dots for players and provide clarity in terms of like what are their top 1, 2, or 3 limiting factors, but like not necessarily getting so myopic where it's like we're only looking at it through a mechanical lens or a mobility lens. It's like, no, all this stuff matters, but we need to be able to like kind of zoom out and connect the dots. Okay, in this situation, like Mitch Keller, this is much more, okay, you're throwing hard, your mechanics are in a good spot, you're throwing strikes, but your stuff's getting hit. We need to make an adjustment to the orientation, or add a sinker, or add a sweeper, or change the usage. But then you have a completely different case study. I'm thinking of like Antoine Kelly in high school, 6'5", 165 pounds. Like that guy's limiting factor was nutrition. It was understanding how to track and monitor his calories. It was getting in the weight room. Like his mechanics were fine. His pitch grips were fine. A year later, he's throwing 98 miles an hour. He's a 2nd-round pick. He's a top prospect. but they had completely different limiting factors. And so the focus of those individuals had to be completely different. So it's just a matter of like connecting the dots and not getting pigeonholed into like, this is the only thing that we do. You have to be able to have more of a broad overall focus to be able to then pinpoint, go deeper on that one thing. This guy's thing is nutrition. This guy's thing is pitch usage. This guy's thing is he's flying open with his trunk, and we need to be able to figure out how to hold him closed, improve the sequencing. And so like our whole thing is, can we get a really effective initial analysis and assessment of the entire picture? Now we can zoom in once we've identified those 1 or 2 limiting factors.
Is there piggybacking off of that, just talking about the different approach for different types of pitchers? Is there a like low hanging fruit or most common factor with groups of pitchers in maybe this modern era that you guys immediately see in a lot of the guys you're seeing, or is it really that different depending on the pitcher?
Do you want to target that, Zombro?
I'll let you start because I'll have my viewpoint.
I mean, there's similar principles that apply across the board. So like, we need to build a strength base. A lot of guys, especially at the high school level, haven't had enough training history to develop a strength base. By the time you're a sophomore or junior in college, you've had 4, 5, 6, 7 years of time in the weight room. Like typically, you've had time to develop a strength base. There's general mobility principles. Some guys are already very loose movers. It's not really ever going to be an issue in their career from a mobility standpoint. Others, it really becomes more of a focus. Generally, from a mechanical principle standpoint, I mean, you see a lot of guys. There are common flaws that you see. You see a lot of guys getting very pushy with the arm. You see a lot of guys. I would say generally it's a sequencing problem for a lot of these guys. So in a perfect world, we have proper sequence from the pelvis to the torso to the arm, and it's that smooth whip-like mechanism. There's that tornado of energy that flows around. There's a bunch of different ways that sequence can get screwed up. A lot of times it's guys bring the upper half into the throw too soon. So pulling open with the trunk or getting pushy, the arm leads the way. But I would say that's one of the more common mechanical issues. It's something to do with the sequence is just out of order. They're not properly delaying the upper half and the arm coming into the throw a little bit later, not really getting everything they can out of their lower half and their pelvis. The upper half becomes too dominant in the throw. And then from a general arsenal standpoint, I would say a lot of guys just don't have a true process when it comes to pitch design. Like they might have 1 or 2 pitches in high school, and it's not that they couldn't throw 5 pitches. It's like they just haven't been exposed to how to learn or how to experiment or measure. But a lot of these guys, like in one bullpen, could have a cutter, and then in another week you could have a workable changeup for them, and one or 2 tweaks to the orientation on their sinker, and like you can add 5 more inches of depth to that sinker. And so a lot of it just comes down to sometimes it's a lack of technology, especially at the high school level. They might not have access to a TrackMan or a Rapsodo. A lot of times though, it's just a lack of knowledge. And so part of our goal is put out more and more educational resources to help that motivated 15-year-old kid who he wants to get better, give him the resources and the knowledge to be able to go and troubleshoot his pitches, on his own time with a slow-mo iPhone video and drawing some Sharpie circles on the ball. He'll be able to get a lot of those results. So it's hard to pinpoint what's the 1 or 2 things. Pretty much everyone needs a requisite level of mobility. Pretty much everybody needs to build a base level of strength. There's basic mechanical principles as well, proper sequencing of the hips, the torso, and the arm. We could go on about that for forever, but it is fairly individual. And the higher the level of the guy, the more individual it becomes, the more those tiny differences really do start to matter. Is this guy a supinator or a pronator? How do we use that to adjust his pitch grips? Do we need to focus more on, absolute power, absolute speed in his lifting routine because he's already built a strength base? There's all these little considerations. The mental game, we didn't even talk about the mental game, the command training stuff. So again, starting kind of big picture, is this guy's main issue that it's a stuff problem, it's a command problem, or is it a health problem? From there, you can kind of hone in, okay, we need to improve his velocity. We need to add another pitch. Okay, this is the stuff problem. Can't throw strikes. This is a command problem. Is it mental? Is it mechanical? Okay, it's a health problem. He can't stay healthy. He's had 2 TJs. He keeps on straining his oblique. Okay, is that linked to strength, workload, mechanics? So that's kind of how I think of it, and tapering down. I know Tyler will kind of sometimes start from ball flight physics and work backwards. So maybe you can explain your thought process there, but that's kind of how I start when I'm looking through. Is it a stuff problem? Is it a command problem? Is it a health problem?
Yeah, I would say I'm going to be pretty focused on like the upper level college and pro demographic on this. My immediate thing is like to follow the stuff fads, the pitch design fads of where baseball is at. Like Ben, so we'll tie that all in right now. Ben talked about a lot of guys who were pushy with the arm, right? And that was the thing like 2 to 3 years ago, everybody thought that high spin efficiency was like the holy grail to performance. So everybody got super pushy to try to backspin the ball more and get, 20 plus vert. Meanwhile, we took a few handful or a few dozen of those guys and dropped their slot a little bit and made them a little less pushy, and they all threw like 5 miles an hour harder. And so then you start to realize, okay, they had this objective of this is the data point I want to get to for good stuff. Now our job is let's go back. What was the mechanical compromise then to make that happen? And is that optimal for them, right? And to Ben's point exactly, like, is there underlying injury history within that? Like Colin Poche, who's here currently, like 2 TJs, multiple obliques, super, super high slot, super pushy arm, but had the best carry in baseball. So then the dilemma becomes, right, like we don't want to drop his slot a lot, but we need to keep him healthier. So like, how do we find that balance, right? And then of course, how do we work on his body to keep him healthy, expose his spine to more lateral flexion stuff? There's so many ways to do it, but I think for me, at least with where I sit currently, a lot of it is back to the intention of what a guy is trying to do with various pitches to manipulate them to create said movement. And then I like to work backwards off that. So does that mean he lowers the slot, raises the slot? Does he flip up earlier, later? Is his axis of rotation of his spine lower or higher? And then you can work all the way back on that to get down to their raw anatomy assessment to see, okay, can they move this way or is it optimal for them? But so for me right now with where the game's at, I think a lot of it is kind of chasing after that pure stuff without understanding your identity, who you are, how you move.
Yeah, I think I love that name drop, Colin Poche. He is nasty breaking stuff. Always been a big fan of his game. And as a video gamer who plays a lot of MLB The Show, he's a must-have in the back end of your bullpen to mess with your opponents. So if that's something he's interested in, you can tell him some random guy in Chicago thinks he's a really cool MLB The Show player. But this question is specifically for Tyler. First of all, from everyone on the Cub fan side, welcome to the Chicago Cubs organization. You're probably about 60 to 90 days in. Let's give us a little background of how the opportunity came up, and what the first 90 days have looked like with the organization.
Yeah, so I will say first and foremost, like Ben and Cohen here at Tread, they very much so helped me within this kind of journey and search because, I was confronted by over 20 teams, right? And you have to weigh those scenarios in your head of like, what's optimal for me and my lifestyle, what I enjoy, what makes me happy. Are we impacting players in a good way? What does that look like for me being a part of Tread, right? And because ultimately, having been here since 2020, you have so much just committed to the vision of Tread and the growth that we've seen. I've already alluded to some of that on here already, but you just want to see that through, right? Like that's a true passion project
Sure.
that you want to see where it goes and how it ultimately helps the game of baseball. So for me, a lot of the decision on where I was going to go was the ability to blend a lot of my strengths from a front office side, having the data component of this, having trained guys hands-on, which involves a lot of S&C integration, medical integration. I've been working a ton in acquisition. So acquisition has been like the main portion of my job thus far, which has been great. I think what really drew me to Chicago over other places, all things equal, was the structure of pitching historically is viewed as like, this is the pitching department over here. You have hitting, you have defense, whatever. If you view pitching as a lateral structure, you have buckets within that where you have acquisition, you have your internal player development, So call that like skill acquisition. You've got medical, you've got S&C, you've got R&D. Like you have all of these realms that need pitching expertise. And, you know, talking to Jed and Carter and JB, Garrett Chiato, Andrew Bassett, Ryan Otero. Obviously, Brez built a lot of infrastructure when he was in Chicago. So they just had really good infrastructure to do that with a good staff to where I could kind of slide within all these departments, which makes it really, really enjoyable. So for right now, vast majority of stuff I'm doing is in acquisition. And then, of course, looking at our own 40-man roster and ideally starting to get through the entirety of the minor leagues.
And Ben, since, you know, with Tyler going over to Chicago, what do you think his biggest strength he's going to bring to the Chicago Cubs organization?
Ooh, I really think
Hard to put you on the spot there.
Yeah,
I just hope it's something nice. He might dog.
Yeah, cover your ears, Tyler.
Yeah.
I really do think there's a lot of value to being able to see the problem from multiple angles, because it's a challenging problem for, let's say, an analyst who's never played baseball before, or at a high level, they've never thrown a baseball at a high level. It's hard to appreciate how that, you know, ties into the other pieces of the puzzle. As a, you know, strength coach, you know, maybe they haven't played at a high level and maybe they don't understand the analytics piece of it. Like you have kind of this traditionally siloed approach, and I think it takes somebody who has a requisite expertise in each of those, or proficiency in each of those, who can kind of see how the puzzle pieces fit together. And so I think he's in a perfect position there, where he's developed a lot of these skills at Tread and just within his own career to be able to, again, see how all the different pieces are fitting together. And that's where a lot of the balls get dropped. My short experience within pro baseball, like, you know, within my own playing career, again, that's where a lot of the balls and miscommunications, balls were dropped, miscommunications happen, is you really want those people who can kind of like integrate all the different departments and make sure, okay, the stuff that the strength coaches are giving you, the weight programs aren't interfering with the bullpens that are happening, aren't interfering with this, aren't interfering with that, aligning all the departments and all the individuals in a common direction. I think it takes somebody who can kind of see all the different puzzle pieces. They understand the biomech, they understand the analytics, they understand the anatomy, the physiology, and they can effortlessly float through those departments. They can have that, you know, deep conversation with the athletic training staff, the medical staff, and then 5 minutes later be talking to the analytics team and have you considered this, and then how does that affect, you know, this guy's pitch grips, and then you're talking to the pitching coach and the player development staff. And so I think that's really the strong suit, is he'll be able to float through those different departments and see how all the pieces integrate together.
Tyler, is there any specific Cubs pitcher you feel like the second you started is already like picking your brain, or has it not gotten to that point? Have you not interacted with a lot of the current players yet?
I haven't interacted with a ton. Obviously, I've known J-Mo for a while through Tread. And J-Mo is like, he's a elite human being who carries a ton of respect within the game as well. Because for years, because obviously Keller has been around, Glasnow has been around. Like those guys speak so highly of J-Mo. We have somewhat of a relationship here. I haven't gotten to know a ton of the guys on a super deep level, we'll call it. But I think that's good from the standpoint of I'm able to still gather as much intel and observe as I can. Not saying like we'll have conversations, but I'm not digging super, super deep at the moment. But I think to Ben's point, and I feel comfortable sharing this, like when I did take the job, one of the things that Counts kept discussing is, and I certainly appreciate this, and I think this is something I learned at Tread really early on, especially like 2020, 2021. Now, obviously, we've grown to a completely different scale, but the same principle applies, is I always thought it was so powerful. And like in that 2020, 2021, when we had 4 to 5 coaches, if I am getting ready to start Brock Stewart's TJ rehab, and this is only like the second TJ rehab I've ever really coached through, like if I had a question, I turn my chair around and I have a conversation about it with Ben, with Devin Hayes, like with all these guys, because we were all problem solving together, which I think is a really powerful thing when you can take a step away, remove yourself, gather more information, have conversations with people who have various domain expertise, and then take your knowledge from all those and condense it back to the player. that's really powerful. And one of the things that Counts talked to me a ton about is at this time, Skos was still our assistant pitching coach. But it's like, if Tommy and Skos are in the trenches every day on the field, you have so much emotion getting caught up in that, right? You have the wins, the loss, the highs, the lows. He alluded to it as like, if there's soldiers out on the field and they're in the trenches, like you need to be the sniper sitting up above, being able to observe things from a different lens. And that's something that's been so powerful here in the private sector is whether it's medical, S&C, skill-specific, mechanical, biomech, whatever it could be, it's like you're able to take a step away and look at it from this massive overview because at Tread, we're controlling every aspect of a guy's development. And now let's gather that information, get it appropriately to the player and go from there. So that's going to be really, really beneficial.
Yeah, I'm just, I think when the Cubs hired Craig Counsell and his just robust experience and so many different facets of the game, similar to kind of what you bring, I was really excited. And I thought that, what his value was going to be seen maybe on a longer plane or time horizon than the immediate wins and losses in the major league team, because he's been on the analytics side. He was a World Series champion player. He was, with a very unusual batting stance that I am okay with admitting I replicated through my high school years. But he brings such a unique perspective. And yeah, I think adding you to the mix as well, as a Cubs fan, just excited to see all these like just high-end, like high analytical thought, multi-touch individuals to like kind of solve. Baseball is such a game of failure. So getting as many viewpoints as possible, it just feels so important with development and success. And yeah, just excited for that to bring. So final segment of the show, just some rapid fire questions, little fun questions about food and baseball, favorite baseball players and stuff. So we'll just kind of go around the horn. We'll have Ben answer first and Tyler. First question, favorite baseball player as a child?
Randy Johnson.
It's a good one.
Well, I alluded to going to games as a child, and that was for Mike Williams, who is a family friend. So I would, by default, have to say Mike Williams, but I was a huge Barry Bonds guy, and always will be. So I'll go Barry Bonds. Are
you a Bonds in the Hall guy?
Absolutely.
Yeah, agreed.
I mean, look, the truth be told, so one of my high school coaches is Derek Cook, who played in the steroid era.
Yeah.
And I think if you asked a lot of people, like you were more in the outs if you weren't doing it than if you were. And, we all try to use some form of performance enhancers now. Like the only person who's more injury prone than myself in the world is Ben. And I know Ben has tried like probably every solution under the sun to be healthy. Like this is to our point of like trying to win on the margins and do what you can is like every supplement, right? Every data technology modality, like they're all performance enhancers. And if it wasn't illegal at the time, why wouldn't I have tried it?
Agreed. 100%. Excellent take. High five. So best moment in your baseball career doesn't have to be in the professional ranks, could be high school. What is the accomplishment that sticks out in your mind?
I mean, for me, I'll start. I would say it was making the team for University of Maryland. So that walk-on tryout, going to that event, really being a very fringe guy. I was an 85-mile-an-hour lefty who was unrecruited out of high school. I go to this event. I've already committed to going to University of Maryland, so I'm already going to show up on campus in late August, September. I go to this like July recruiting camp thing, and I'm sitting 85 miles an hour and, strike out the first couple guys. And the head coach at the time comes out and he's like, I guess he seemed kind of impressed, but he's like trying to make me nervous. And he basically says, hey, kind of like what you're doing, but if you can strike out the next two batters, you'll have a spot on the team. And then he walked to the dugout and somehow I struck out the next two batters. I walked off the field and he shook my hand. And he said, you have a spot on the team. And I went into that day expecting to make the team, but I didn't realize until after the fact, like how ridiculously like naive it was to think you could just like show up and like make the team out of like 200 other people that are at this camp. But it all worked out. I bought myself 4 more years, and I don't know. To me, that was just like the culmination of everything I'd done through high school, all that effort, and I took advantage of the opportunity. Like that was like the make it or break it moment, and I was able to take advantage of that, and that ultimately bought me the chance to have 4 more years, and ultimately bought me the chance to get drafted and have, just continue to extend the career as long as I could.
How about you, Tyler?
I would say when I was minor league reliever of the year in 19, that was certainly a pinnacle moment, and kind of transitioned me from like the undrafted guy who was filling innings, going to extended, not doing anything, and just having to wear it. Kind of became like a legitimate prospect. That was a pinnacle moment for me. And then I think coming back off my head injury and pitching in a game again is certainly like a monumental moment. I've had tons of issues after that as well, but to get back thinking about probably where I was from a physical standpoint on June 4th of 2021 was certainly a big moment to get back there.
So you're both pitchers by trade. What was the favorite pitch that you had that you threw, and what was one that you wish you could have mastered?
So I was always a two-seam guy. I'm a high-efficiency pronator, low-stop pronator. I wish I had really been able to figure out a changeup. That's just a pitch I had never quite figured out. I wish I had the hands for a splitter. I wish somebody had taught me how to spike a slider back then, because I really struggled to supinate. There's just, I could have had 5 pitches, and I really mostly just leaned on how good my fastball was once I started throwing a little bit harder. But, that was the main thing holding me back. I didn't understand enough about pitch design. TrackMan wasn't around at the time in my career. I just didn't know enough at the time to really take advantage of, all the different options at our disposal now.
I was going to say, you and I got the poor end of the genetic curve being low slot pronate. So you
got VIA though.
I mean, I've got the signs on my doors that people hang. It says low slot pronators keep out, supinators only. That tells you where you and I were at in our career. For me, it would have just been my favorite pitch was a slider. I wish I was a supinator, so it could have been even better. Because I did not have really the top end velocity capacity either. So I just had to rely on 98th percentile command, which is not a fun game to play. Would much rather have the big stuff and make it easy to use. So I would just say, in general, I wish I was a supinator. That's the best way I can leave it.
All right. Favorite modern day, current era pitcher to watch?
I'd probably say Blake Snell. There's a bunch. Paul Skeens, obviously, awesome to watch. I love how Blake Snell throws. I just love. He's just a great example. I'm very close to. There's no such thing as perfect mechanics, but there is highly efficient mechanics, and I like how he throws. He gets into ridiculous separation, ridiculous retraction. His curveball's incredible. He throws it super hard. He tunnels everything well. So I'd say Blake Snell.
Ben has such a bias with guys who have long levers and really deep ranges of motion.
I'm a loose mover. I like the loose movers. Sir Anthony Dominguez. I forgot to mention him.
Anybody who's hypermobile, who flips up really, really deep in abduction, that's Ben's guy. So I'm going to counter that with Jason Adam, because I love JA, and I think he's such a beautiful architecture of using his anatomy and physiology and using that to build his biomech profile and using that to build out the data profile, because he's missing 40 degrees of elbow extension. I'll never forget the first time I assessed him. I said, "Let's see your elbow extension." And he goes like this. And I'm like, what do you mean? And he had a Lecranon fracture way back with the Twins. And so he's missing a ton of elbow extension, which is how then he went to more of the short arm action, which is how he went to the seam shift changeup that he cuts. It is a beautiful picture of taking your anatomy and building things around it. So I'm going to go with JA. It's short, tight windows, short arm action, has to cut it by default versus your long lever, deep position, perfect picture pitchers.
This is for our longtime listeners. I'm going to chime in on this answer. For me, it was Kyle Hendricks for a very long time. He introduced me to the idea of tunneling and arm slot and actually caring about those things and how the pitch was perceived leaving the hand. And also just like for every guy that's never thrown hard, watching that guy dominate like he did in 2016 was just so special. My son's named after Kyle Hendricks. I say that almost every episode. Huge Kyle Hendricks guy. Sad he's not in the Cubs. Understand it's a business, but he's a Cub forever. Definitely still in my. I'll probably tune into the Angels games he pitches on LV.TV just to get that feeling, sweet emotion when he walks in onto the mound and see that change up, the cut change that he's so expertly used for years at Wrigley Field. Last one. I think I already know one of the answers, Tyler. We were talking a little bit beforehand, but favorite non-baseball hobby.
Let's see. I want to see if Ben knows this. What my answer is going to be.
Yeah, you're into F1 racing. I knew that.
There you go.
You have a whole setup, don't you?
I do.
Have the steering wheel. I mean, I've never seen your setup, but it's always tough for me to answer that question because I'm like, this is all I think about. But the answer is like lifting weights, I guess. Like that to me was one of the things I really fell in love with about the training process because it's one of the really controllable parts of training. It can be very frustrating. A lot of uncontrollables in baseball. You can put in all the time, the effort, and things can just not pan out. Like you have bad outing, you get injured. But in the weight room, there's a lot more control over if you sleep, you hit the nutrition, you have the right program. Like you can see that progress much more steadily. So I always fell in love with that process, and definitely still attempting to get bulky. 17 years into training and not there yet, but that's definitely the goal.
Tyler, you already alluded to what yours is. Do you have anything you want to share about F1 that really trips the trigger?
No, I mean, I love F1. I love the data behind it. I love varying car setups relative to tracks. I love tire deg. I love sim racing. There's nothing better. There's so much strategy involved in it. But I think the reason I love it is just kind of how I approach pitching too, is you can only control what you can control, which is velo, horizontal vertical movement, end zone rate, your usage trends, right? Like you can't control the hitter. And when I race F1 competitively and do long sim races, right, you have alternate strategies, you switch on tires at different points in time. And like, you have to be really disciplined to keep your head down to focus on your race, right? Like your lap times are different from other people's. You're on different strategies. You might have already short pitted and you come out and last, so I love the element of you have to strategize, put the plan in place, track your lap times. There's so much strategy involved, but it's all controllable, which I love. And I need a hobby away from baseball because all Ben does is think about training. So I try to get away from it at some point.
Well, thank you guys so much for hopping on Bricks Behind the Ivy. I really appreciate it. Usually leave a little bit of time at the end, and we'll have Tyler goes first just to share where you guys can be found on social media, if that's applicable, and anything you want to promote or have cooking, especially Ben, if you want to tell people where they can find Tread and all the content you guys are putting out there. Especially, I just saw a really cool video that you did on Yamamoto and how he's able to maximize the efficiency of his size to throw the way he does, which was super awesome. I'll put a link to that in the description of this podcast. Please check it out. Super cool. Just watched it like an hour ago.
Yeah, I mean, if they put in my name or Tread Athletics, they'll find us on every platform. I think YouTube is the best follow. That's where they're going to be able to see the long form videos where we really dive deep on breaking down hard throwing pitchers. They can really see more behind the scenes of our process. We have a whole content and marketing team that they're awesome. They can really bring to life a lot of what's happening within the facility. And so, we believe in putting out a lot of that information for free. And Really, that's it. We don't have any hard sales pitches or anything. It's if you're interested in the training side and how we build monsters who can throw strikes and have nasty stuff, we put out and document that on a daily basis. So the shorts are all on Instagram and Twitter and stuff like that, but YouTube is, I think where most of that like deep value will be for the pitching nerds interested in that.
Yeah. All my socials are T_Zombro, either 24 or 42. I don't remember which one is which, but to echo what Ben said though, I think utilizing Tread's channel, especially on YouTube, this is something I often get a lot of questions about. And so Ben obviously is like the face of a lot of our content and does a lot of the long form videos, but our content team is incredible. So we have a full staff in there constantly chopping up videos, going through new ideas. From my perspective, like doing a lot of the data driven initiative videos, going through those in a way where we try to boil it down for a younger population and older population. And those guys do incredible work with B-roll overlaying that. Because the way in which that process works is Ben and I are a little different, but I'll just walk out and I'll just start rambling I'll have a topic, but I'll ramble in the camera for 5 to 10 minutes or however long they want me to. And they'll chop up the videos. And those are like all the shorts that they put out and all the great informational content. So anything from like a pitching developmental lens, definitely go check out the Tread YouTube, because we're constantly refining things, putting out new clips, stuff that like I've recorded years ago and don't even think about anymore. Like they'll find a way to re-embed it, to surface it with some educational purpose. So those guys do a ton of really, really good work. So definitely go check out Tread Athletics, Twitter, Instagram, and the YouTube channel especially is really, really good.
I think that's a perfect transition to remind folks that if you like what you hear, make sure you subscribe and like the Bricks Behind the Ivy YouTube page. So check that out today. Thank you guys so much again for joining us on this episode of Bricks Behind the Ivy. Until next time, Cub fans, go Cubs. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Bricks Behind the Ivy. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you're reviewing if you're listening to this podcast so you can help us out, and share with a friend. This has been a Bleacher Bunch Productions. We'll see you next week, and go Cubs.